today's second part of our prediction minigame for 10.1.5 when it comes to specs is, of course, for tanks and healers that we have not gone over yesterday when we talked about the DPS. Same reasoning as yesterday, these were predictions revealed to me in a dream. Let's start with the first spec immediately, which is Brewmaster Monk right over here, as well as being quite certain that Brewmaster Monk will remain over there for the next patch. That's because they're not receiving that many drastic changes. They are slightly positive, the ones they are receiving, and they are currently already a pretty solid, stable spec. It's not meta, it's not flavor of the month, it's not super popular, but it's still just an overall solid spec when it comes to tanks. Then we have Blood DK. So Blood DK is weird because they are not receiving many changes in 10.1.5, but they have been buffed back to back already. They got a 6.5% buff in a hotfix a week ago, and then now they're getting an 8% damage buff as well. It's more damage than any other tank has been buffed with recently. And, you know, the lack of damage has been one of the main weaknesses of Blood DK in Mythic Plus for a long time. In the raid, they remain a reasonably popular spec, because if you go to tanks in the raid, Blood DK is the second most popular one. So I think they will stay an overall meta tank spec with a pretty reasonable certainty. They will remain a meta tank spec. There can be multiple meta tanks at once. There can't just be one meta tank. So I think they will remain a pretty solid and stable spec in 10.1.5, especially after the damage buffs. We go back now to a healer. We go at the end of the run, we go to Preservation Evoker. Preservation Evoker is receiving a reasonable amount of positive changes, but they are all, you know, we mentioned them before. It's some small changes here and there. The damage increase to compensate for the Amulet, the healing increase to compensate for the Rewind nerf. You know, a few other quality of life like the Life Giver Flames change. So reasonably positive changes. They were already doing quite well overall right now. They are currently doing quite well in the raid when it comes to overall HPS, although HPS is not super important in the raid. It is still reasonably relevant. So I think they will continue to be a meta spec in 10.1.5. I'm pretty certain of this. They will remain a meta spec without being flavor of the month, without being the top healer. I still think they will remain a pretty good spec overall. Going backwards, we go to Prot Warrior. So Prot Warrior is gaining 6% more damage in 10.1.5. Unfortunately, at the moment, Prot Warrior is far and below the least played tank spec in the raid, and once we go in Mythic Plus, they are also the least played tank spec as well. They're not receiving that many changes. The damage increase is a compensation buff basically all the other tanks are receiving. Therefore, there is no reason to expect people to be thinking anything different about Prot Warrior in the near future, especially because of the hype surrounding a couple of the other tank specs we are about to see soon. Situation for Prot Warrior seems pretty doomed at the moment. Then we have Mistweaver. Well, there isn't much to point out when it comes to Mistweaver. It's basically the healer version of Protection Warrior. It's the most underplayed spec at the moment in the raid and in Mythic Plus. So considering they are not receiving that many changes when it comes to Mistweaver Monk in 10.1.5, nothing really is going to lead us to believe Mistweaver is going to be changing in 10.1.5. So I'm pretty certain about their state. After them, we have Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman is in a bit of a more interesting situation because they, unlike Mistweaver, did actually start Season 2 as quite the popular spec and the major pick in both the raid and Mythic Plus. Now, they're not receiving that many changes compared to Announcement Shaman, for example. They are getting the compensation buff for the Amulet and a 3% healing increase, which is nothing overall. Yes, they have also gotten their tier set buff, but their tier set was so incredibly weak, it's not really gonna change anything about their situation in terms of healing. So given that their situation in the raid has been crushing down week after week, and in Mythic Plus they have been losing slowly, but eventually they will likely lose more and more slots over to Holy Paladin. As you can see here already, when it comes to top runs, it's just Paladin. There is some Evokers in there, some Druids start showing up, more Paladins, more Evokers. There is like 2 Shamans, 3 Shamans in here, 4 Shamans. It's 4 Shamans in the top 100, you know. So I don't think this is going to be changed. I think this is gonna stay here at the very top and not really go up anymore. And more specs, perhaps Paladin, perhaps Evoker, perhaps Druid, will continue to rise over time. So I think they are definitely not gonna laugh at you if you play Resto Shaman, but I think they have lost their meta rating at this point. I think they are not going to continue to be the super, relevant healer spec in 10.1.5. After Resto Shaman, you have Holy Priest. So Holy Priest has this major divide, of course, where they are middling in terms of HPS, yet they are vastly the more popular healer in the raid. And also they are basically underplayed, non-existent in Mythic Plus when it comes to very high keys. So how do we put them? How can we possibly rate them? It would be something like flavor of the month when it comes to the raid, because of the power they bring, but similarly, people are gonna laugh at you if you try to play Holy Priest in Mythic Plus. So, I still think I'm gonna put them as meta, mostly because as being a very popular raid healer spec has a lot of power, a lot of value overall, so they're definitely gonna stay meta, but I'm not nearly as certain. I'm maybe even, fine, I'm gonna put them here. I'm pretty certain they will stay meta, but it's just how bad they are once things start getting difficult in Mythic Plus, that it's hard to judge them seriously when you look at the overall picture and not just a raid situation for Holy Priest. To me, it just looks like they are on a crutch. The crutch is called Symbol of Hope, it's called Power Infusion in the raid that leaves them here. That's basically the only thing that's saving them right now in the raid. Then we have Discipline. Discipline is in an even worse situation, because while Discipline is still doing bad, if anything worse than Holy Priest in the raid, they are not remotely doing as well in Mythic Plus compared to how well Holy Priests are doing in the raid. Holy Priests are somewhat like 50% more popular than the second most popular healer in the raid. Meanwhile, in Mythic Plus, Discipline is just not very popular. So Discipline is in definitely a worse state. People will probably start laughing behind your back if you play Discipline Priest, and the likelihood of this continuing is quite certain overall, because Priest is not receiving that many changes. They do get Luminous Barrier, which will likely make them better in Mythic Plus, which is good because it was their strong point already, but I don't think much is going to change when it comes to their power level in the meta right now. Talking about changing power levels in the meta, we have Paladin, both Holy and Protection. They have quite the changing power level in the meta, because Prot Paladin started as this super meta spec when it came to tanking. It still shows up as being the super popular pick, but much like Resto Shaman, this was from a few weeks ago. If you keep going down, you will see that there is, a bunch of Vengeance Demon Hunter. You start seeing a bunch of Guardian Druids over time, Guardian, Vengeance, and just 3 Paladins from the same player, right? Again, same player Paladin and nobody else. You keep going backwards, there is one Paladin, right? So it's going down, and this is going to be trickling down on the more casual part of the player base. If they keep seeing the top ranks, the top logs, the top tournaments showing Vengeance and Guardian, Vengeance and Guardian, the Paladin will slowly slow down in terms of power. So I think, okay, fine, I will make them lose the meta status. I think they will lose meta status in 10.1.5 once more of these two guys will become popular. And the likelihood of this, I'm not as certain, because Prot Paladin is still a popular tank, even in all keys, even in middling keys, even in clown keys, they are very popular. So maybe many of these players simply won't care that Guardian is becoming popular, that Vengeance Demon Hunter is super strong, and they will continue to play Prot Paladin. So I think they will lose meta status, but I don't think it's that certain, especially in the lower level of keys, is what might happen in 10.1.5. What about the Holy Paladin? So we have made a video, in fact we have made a couple of videos about the many changes of Holy Paladin. And we've also made a follow-up video about the concerning further changes to Holy Paladin. So at this moment, my judgment of Holy Paladin is here. That's how certain I am of what Holy Paladin is gonna be in 10.1.5. But I'm still gonna go with my initial hunch, which is that they will be flavor of the month. So far, the major changes of Blizzard this expansion were to the release of the new spec, which was Preservation, which was flavor of the month. Then they buffed Devastation with a few changes and it became flavor of the month. They reworked Red Paladin, flavor of the month, and yet another, the 57th rework of Shadow Priest, and it was flavor of the month for a long time. So I'm gonna go with the track record of Blizzard and assume that Holy Paladin will remain flavor of the will join the ranks of being the newly reworked spec that becomes flavor of the month. However, I am not certain at all. I was way more certain when I was looking at the changes 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But recently there have been quite a few changes to the spec that have made me worry about the future of the spec in 10.1.5. So I'm not that certain about the changes coming for Holy Paladin. After them, we have Resto Druid. Resto Druid is the healer that is receiving the least amount of changes out of all of Druids. They get the 10% damage increase compensation buff for the Amulet nerf, and then a 15% damage increase compensation buff for the nerf of Nature's Vigil. This will be relevant in Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus, where they are already doing reasonably fine overall, they are a reasonably popular spec. Yes, when you start looking at the super high keys, there aren't that many druids. There is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 druids in the top 100. So it's still not very popular at the very, very high level, but it remains a more than enough enjoyed spec in the high key levels. And in the raid, it's still one of the powerhouses of, HPS when it comes to raid healing, as well as the popularity of Resto being quite healthy. So given that the change will most likely leave them untouched in the raid while buffing their overall damage in Mythic Plus, although it might not be a buff, the Nature's Vigil change, but still, I think overall Resto Druid will remain popular while still not being a meta spec overall. And I'm pretty certain of this, because Resto Druid is not that meta in the sense that the meta spec in the raid is arguably Holy Priest, and nowadays even Evoker or Paladin, all three of them. In Mythic Plus, it was arguably Resto Shaman and Preservation Evoker at the start, followed lately by Holy Paladin. So Resto Druid was always like the fourth one behind them, was the one coming right after the meta specs. That's why I'm not putting them in meta category right now. Then we have the final point that we left for last for both Guardian and Vengeance Demon Hunter. This is pretty interesting because we have gotten the growth of Vengeance before this patch. This patch is bringing nothing to Vengeance. This patch is bringing a 4% damage buff, while every other tank is gaining a bigger damage buff, with the exception of Paladin. So if anything, they are actually getting nerfed in 10.1.5 because the other tanks are gaining more damage than them. Yet they are still looking quite good. The other one is of course Guardian Druid, which is getting buffed significantly in many of the changes, the positive changes, especially things like talent repositionings in the talent tree, things like Galactic Guardian and Thorns of Iron in particular, changing position for the better. I think we might be seeing an interesting situation. A situation like this might be a possible situation where both of these become meta, with Vengeance being the flavor of the month tank. I think the one for Vengeance is pretty certain. I'm not sure if I want to gamble my house on it. About Vengeance, I will gamble my house on Vengeance remaining flavor of the month. I am definitely not going to gamble my house on Guardian Druid, but I'm still quite certain, quite positive that they will remain a solid tank as they have been now, but more. Right now they're only solid by the top level of try-hard tanks which reroll to them in the very, very high keys. I think that with 10.1.5, maybe more of the general player base overall will get to play more Guardian Druid as it becomes stronger from the changes of 10.1.5. That's how I think things are going to shape up in 10.1.5. When it comes to tanks, we can say there is a new duo plus the forever never moving DK, which is always used somehow in either the Raid or Mythic Plus, with the two new spec making way. The one for Holy Paladin being much more volatile and much more risky compared to the other ones because of the massive rework going the way of Holy Paladin. And then, to be fair, the majority of the other specs might not be changing that much, mostly because not much of the balance tuning is focused around them in the patch. So some specs are losing a tier or gaining a tier because of the continued progress of the spec, like Prot Paladin losing meta status because of the other tanks doing better, Resto Shaman losing meta status because it's been doing worse and worse throughout the tier, etc, and not necessarily because of the amount of changes they are receiving in 10.1.5. So these, I think, are the changes, the adjustments that will happen in 10.1.5 based on my own hunches, my own visions, my own revelations happening to me in my dreams. Obviously, just like for yesterday's video, let me guys know if you have any major drastic differences with these predictions. If you think some of these specs are being quite underrated or perhaps overrated, let me guys know in the comments down below. Besides this, for today on this Tuesday, I'm going to leave you to the rest of the beginning or soon beginning of patch 10.1.5 coming this reset. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which you can still support completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself without having to spend any of your hard-earned cash. With these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, now, I was 85% sure of the predictions when it came to the DPS. For this one, I might even raise it up to a 90%. I'm confident.